Hello, thank you everyone for coming. This is our first sector-oriented panelist. We already one in February, but it was agnostic. This one is concentrated and very much related to healthcare and life science. A small intro to EquityMatch. EquityMatch, for who doesn't know, is a platform I've been launching for the last 6 months, almost a year actually. And we do our best to support startups all over the world in not only fundraising, but also get knowledge and tips or what's going on in the venture capital ecosystem. Today, as I said, we run our first webinar sector-oriented. It's going to be healthcare and life science. We have a beautiful panel, all extremely well knowledge, venture capitalists and expert in the sector, and we would love to talk with them and we have very nice topics to discuss. Now, let me start introducing our panelists. Pamela Walker, healthcare investment, value creation, and strategy expert. Pamela, please introduce yourself.
Hi, it's so nice to meet everyone. Thanks, Max. Yes, so I have a PhD in medical sciences and an executive MBA, both from Oxford, and I've spent the past 2 decades in the life sciences and medtech space, so both as a strategic advisor and as an investor, and I'm thrilled to be here today.
Thank you, Pamela. Thank you very much. Let me jump to the second one, which is Elena. Elena, please, Shankar.
Hi all, I'm Dr. Elena Shankar. I'm scientist by my training. I've been working in science and research for almost a decade. I have bachelor from Germany in immunology and immuno-oncology, master from Singapore in biotech and gene editing, PhD from France in endocytosis, and currently I'm working on glioblastoma treatment at Mount Sinai Hospital, New York.
Thank you, Elena. I want to move to the next one, which is we go to the mail now. And Alessandro Monaco, Healthcare Pharma and Biotech Consultant. Alessandro, please.
Good evening, everyone. I'm very happy to be here to share with you some insight about the healthcare investment. I have a molecular biology background. I've been a researcher myself, but after that, I've been working mostly on regulatory affairs and healthcare investment support. And currently, I'm a senior consultant for several global pharmaceutical companies. So very happy to be here with you guys.
Thank you, Alessandro, for coming. Okay, and now we move to Bruno Montanari, partner at Serobas Life Science. Bruno, please.
Yes, hi everyone. Happy to be there as well. So I spent the last 20 years actually in venture capital in different funds, as you mentioned, lately partner at Seroba, which is an early stage VC based in Dublin in Ireland. And I started my career in investment banking in healthcare in London between Deutsche Bank and Merrill Lynch after having my degree as a pharmacist and a major management degree. So happy to talk through the various topics during this hour and a half. Would be great.
Thank you, Bruno. The last one, but not the least, as we say, Simon Turner.
Thanks very much.
Cefinova Partners. Simon, please.
Pleasure, everyone. So Simon Turner over at Sofinova. My background is mainly within the precision medicine treatment decision field. So really looking at how new technologies can better make inferences, identify patients more effectively, bringing that both from a corporate level and then also from an early stage investment level.
Thank you, Simon. So really thank you guys for coming. I really appreciate it and I love because when you have such a knowledge, it's always beautiful to talk and discussing. These are the 6 topics we are going to talk today. And I will introduce by one each topic. And I would like to introduce the first one. The life science sector has played a pivotal role amid the COVID-19 pandemic. To cope with the global crisis, traditional competitive partners to accelerate research and develop. And the fastest novel vaccine in history. With the introduction of this new normal, the digitization is broadening the horizon of new possibility in the life science sector. The defined workplace environments, the shift in healthcare delivery, and innovative collaboration to create efficiencies are a few examples of what is leading this unprecedented change supported by technological advancement. While pharmaceutical innovation is saving the world, now is the opportunity for biopharma and medtech company to sustain this forward momentum. Now, my question is, what is the current status of healthcare and life science? Bruno.
Okay, so I'll try to briefly paint the big picture and try to set a frame for the next topics. I mean, obviously, it's a large open question, which I will try to refine to the following points. For those being part of this healthcare industry, be it operationally or as an investor like myself and others on this panel, we've been witnessing not incremental innovation, but really game changers, sometimes never thought about years before. And among many other examples, one can think about gene and cell therapy, now with the first approval coming to market in Europe and the US, where actually you don't only address symptoms, but you cure diseases, and diseases whereby patients would have very few years still remaining to live. When one can think as well about the CAR-T, which have been a dramatic improvement in terms of survival of patients which had no other therapeutic options left, and obviously a very negative end to their life. So this has changed dramatically the way patients have been treated, taken care of, and have dramatically changed the outcome. And I think all of this will not have come with the confluence of several factors. Among those, obviously, all the investment made over the years, be it in startups, but as well in pharma, and the dedication of the people there to try and bring those solutions to the patients eventually. But as well, I would say the regulatory support, regulatory authorities being more keen to help those sponsors for new drugs and devices in terms of setting the right study design, the right endpoints and observations to make, but as well listening not only to those sponsors, but to the patient association and to the needs of the families taking care of those patients as well. Of course, there's been some controversy lately. Maybe some of you or among the audience will want to come back on this Aduhelm setback in Alzheimer's disease and what it means for the sector. But we need to see all the positive aspects of that. And for still the skeptics, I will encourage them to look more at the glass half full rather than half empty, given all the great years that we've been going through. There's another point which I like to make in terms of the status of healthcare, which is related with the last 2 horrific years we all lived with COVID-19. And I think that something which has been a bit of a dramatic change, and again, positively, is the digital adoption, both by the medical community, but as well by the patients. And this has totally changed the picture, I think, for digital health. And while I'm not necessarily the best one to talk about it on this panel, I'm sure this will be addressed by some of my colleague panelists here. But this is a very important change. Still, despite all those good things, clearly unmet medical needs remain. And one important thing to keep in mind is that innovation has to be affordable. And we need to make sure that we can more democratize, as I would qualify it, the diagnostic and treatment that exist or that are yet to come, because if it is at the end of the day to be restricted to only a few well-off people or well-insured people, well, I think we will all have missed something here. And I know many parties that are trying to improve on that front, and it's probably a topic that we want to come back onto. And two last quick points on my end. I think innovation is not only about drug and devices; it percolates throughout the patient's care, and I would say even into the status of healthy individuals. And this is where prevention is being more and more put on the front line to actually either prevent a healthy individual from becoming a patient or somehow delay an inevitable outcome in terms of getting into a disorder or evolving into a more severe form of the disorder. And here it relates to how individuals and patients are being monitored, because this is as well a clear unmet need, both for doctors as much as individuals. You take a drug, a medicine, or you have a device. Once you get out of the inpatient setting of the hospital or the clinic, honestly, it's very difficult to understand what happens and in a way to make sure that quickly enough this person can be going back to the doc or to the clinic and adapt his or her treatment with the best possible solution. And this is something as well where some improvement are very much welcomed. Lots of efforts have been put into it. And this is another topic we should take care of during this panel. And my last point is about coming back to the industry. Long, complex, costly development and R&D process, and with very low probability of success. And I think that among the topics that you have chosen to cover, this is as well where I think technology is already having a go and a bite at, with some early signals that actually we're going in the right direction. So I will stop short there from taking more of the time of the audience of my panelists, but I hope I set the frame with a few key topics that we will address in the coming hour.
Anyway, we have a panel discussion, so we need to discuss. Now, let me go from one male to female. Pamela, you want to talk about?
So my focus, I guess, on this panel is more on the tech side. So I guess a complement to what Bruno is sharing from a life sciences standpoint. But I think to Bruno, your brilliant point around the democratization of healthcare, this is really where technology has its incredible play, because it's really all about using what we have to innovate and then transform the patient experience in an affordable way and a way that crosses borders. So that's really our challenge. How do we invest effectively in technology and in the innovative businesses that come up with the med tech that's going to create that affordable, democratized impact? So I completely agree with that point. And then I think to your last point, Bruno, where I've seen the greatest transformation in the past few years with tech in relation to R&D is really all about refining the clinical trial process. So it's about more refined patient population selection, remote participation in clinical trials, which has really accelerated during the pandemic, which has been incredible. And also more effective analysis and exploration of the different endpoints. So I think technology is really transforming the way we're able to deliver effective treatments in healthcare to consumers and patients. And Alessandro, I see you nodding, so I'm sure there's things that you want to add in too, because you're also an expert in this space.
Thank you, Pamela. You totally got me. No, it's so interesting what you're saying, that it's you're really sparkling a lot of idea, and thank you both for this. Yeah, I think that the healthcare is in very good shape. Patients a little bit less. And I'm sorry to be redundant, but I really cannot avoid talking about the 2 disruptive years that we all believe in, that were completely, I would say, again, disruptive, and they completely changed what's already with there. They probably, rather than change, they probably alight and enhanced some trends, some transformative trend that were already going on. Let's say that the global healthcare market has received somehow $50 billion in investment. Okay, so that was a totally unprecedented amount of money before the COVID, and this has sparkled a lot of new ideas. Some areas, if you think about remote patient monitoring, have seen an explosive growth fueled by the, really the pandemic need. But since you were talking about the democratization of technology and the opportunity that the patient, the end user was actually the one that was actually benefit from all of this. Is this really happening? We don't know. We don't know yet. For sure, there was a total focus on communicable disease and a total almost disinterest in the non-communicable disease. That let me say that this is the absolutely vast majority of the healthcare issues. So many people with chronic disease were completely dismissed. How this is important for the investment? Well, I mean, all the technologies that allowed patients with chronic disease, elderly, fragile people, to access some information or access to physicians were absolutely booming in this period. So the digital technologies and remote monitoring, telemedicine, and so on. So the COVID-19 pandemic has catalyzed somehow investment in already growing health tech sector, but the amount of money, the magnitude of investment that were there were totally unprecedented and really generate a spike in these activities. I agree with Pamela and Bruno saying that we need to make sure this technology are actually reaching the final user. And for what concerns venture capital, private equity, people that are investing in this technology, I think that we really need to make sure that investments are targeting the right objective, because oftentimes this money, and we're talking about a lot of money, are reaching initiatives that oftentimes have no really way to move forward. We should be careful, and we have real responsibility to make sure that the investment that we are driving are actually toward a direction that could be positive for the mankind.
Thank you, Alessandro. Simon.
Yeah, what can I say? When I look at it right now, I just kind of think that it's probably one of the most exciting times to be alive, and particularly focusing in on the life science space. We've gone through so much interesting developments over the last decades, just in terms of medical products, in terms of advancement. Bruno, you were alluding to cell and gene therapies finally kind of coming of age. We've got all types of technologies and approaches. For me, I guess the biggest impact right now, and kind of saying that, wow, life sciences, particularly healthcare, is set to revolutionize over the next years. And excuse me, I'm very biased to this space, is particularly the advent of kind of the digital health, digital medicine, digital therapeutic era. And it's interesting, when we were sitting and just kind of talking about this and hearing about it, I was thinking about it, and it's kind of come to, okay, we've had enormous advances in medicine in the past, when Louis Pasteur went and developed the vaccines, Ian Fleming developed antibiotics, but they were quite kind of niche and specific focused, infectious diseases, communicable diseases, etc. Now we're at this age now where health tech, where digital health, digital medicine is disrupting absolutely everything across the ecosystem. And it's everything from developing models for preclinical in silico modeling, basically, of cell-cell interactions to develop new targets, or taking that through to the analysis part of that, making the patient the center again. Can we diagnose them earlier, therefore go in and basically cure a disease before it even becomes an issue more than half an hour of surgery or radiotherapy or something like that? Can we therefore also monitor these patients in real time and basically say, okay, listen, you are about to have a major event happen. Let's preempt it. Let's either pre-treat you, hospitalize you, get you into the right setting. And again, we're starting to see this with set tools, for example, in sepsis now. We can detect sepsis or septic potential patients what is it, 24 hours now before the actual clinical symptoms appear. These are enormous windows and opportunities that we're finally being able to leverage and exploit. And they're coming of age basically because now we have the data on the one hand and the computational power on the other. And it's to what we were saying, partly because that's just the way that the field has been advancing. COVID has, of course, accelerated that enormously because we've adopted more digital technologies and opened our eyes to it. But I mean, I think we're only starting to see really the tip of the iceberg in terms of what we can do, all the way through to digital therapeutics. You know, there are now treatments that are causing neuromodulation, so actual changes in the way that your neurological patterns are behaving, so you can actually treat fundamental diseases which basic drugs would just not been able to, because they would have been there, they would have tackled the symptoms, but then as soon as you stop treatment, that's it, you no longer have effect. So from my perspective, I'd say healthcare and life sciences, well, we're suffering just like everyone else, I guess, in the stock market, as we've been seeing lately, but because of the non-cyclicality of the state, I would say over the next 5 to 10 years, we're going to see some enormous potential growth here.
Absolutely, I agree. Elena, if you want to add something.
I mean, yeah, I have just a couple of things to add. I mean, like we see obviously big improvement in the field of going to the digital sciences and going to the digital healthcare. But the biggest problem, like a lot of people are willing to move more into one direction to work. Like either it's like COVID or COVID vaccines. So now everyone wanted to focus on RNA vaccines. But at the same time, we are starting to forget that there are always like some fundamental diseases like cancer or Alzheimer or brain problems. So we also shouldn't forget about it. So I wanted to push more into diversity and the diversity of research without focusing and putting all in force to treat something, and which is at the end of the day probably doesn't make too much sense to put all effort into that.
Thank you, Elena. Thank you very much.
Sorry, Max, if I could just rebound on that. It's really interesting, Elena. What I've been seeing a lot, at least in the kind of the digital space, is a lot of the companies are kind of targeting something initially. And you're right, you know, COVID has clearly become, you know, the go-to standard. Now I'd say we're starting to tail off from that. Everyone seems to have kind of put it aside. But a lot of kind of the disruptions that we're seeing, if it's again modeling, disease modeling, patient modeling, etc., they're having these beautiful effects of being able to first construct the model, develop an understanding of it, and then actually take those inferences and leverage that into other diseases. And what's beautiful about it, because it's a digitized format, we're able to basically make strides in the one indication, leverage that into the next one, and therefore basically have chewed off maybe 80% of the development timelines required. It's this amazing acceleration that we're seeing, at least.
No, I completely agree with it. I completely, I completely support everything that comes to the digital science. And we shouldn't diminish completely going more into life and more accelerating artificial intelligence. It's just the point is that I wanted to stress out that we shouldn't just to put all our efforts into one field, because it never doesn't make sense. Like what I can currently see on the market, like everyone wants to invest into RNA vaccines or RNA producing labs, which is okay. I mean, like we already have a couple of on the market which are doing pretty well. So why do we need more? But people apparently they're trying to get crazy about it and trying to put almost all efforts, even the funding, into RNA vaccines, which is, for me, as I already discussed, it doesn't make sense even from strategical point of view.
I have something to add to that. That's a really interesting point, Elena. I think it speaks to the complexity of this space, and I think from an investor standpoint, there aren't many that are obviously as skilled as you are, because you're in the thick of the science. So it's very difficult. If you're looking at investment pockets and investment trends, it's hard to really know what to follow, what to hold back from, how to really properly diversify the portfolio. And so to Simon's point, there's an enormous amount of opportunity and excitement. I think a big challenge for investors will be finding how to craft that right portfolio that's going to make sense, because there's going to be a wealth of opportunity. And I think also I think Alessandro was making the point that there's a lot of funding going into certain businesses, and we do need to be very thoughtful about making sure that funding also goes into the right innovative businesses, because we definitely see, especially in the UK, there's a bit of a funding graveyard at Series A for medtech specifically. There's a lot of funding that goes in Series B and beyond. So like, how do we encourage the right kind of innovation as investors that's meaningful for patients and that's diversified, to Elena's point? I think it's really interesting.
And thank you, Pamela. Just to build on what you say, there's a further level of complexity, which is made up of the regulatory part. I mean, all the technology fund that we're founding suitable for to be reimbursed in many of the states, just like Italy, Spain, France itself, UK, where healthcare provisional service are actually funded by the national healthcare system. So how we can ex ante, like in the early phase of development, assess which technology could be technically suitable to be reimbursed by the national healthcare system. And this is a further complexity in the already complex equation of assessing new technologies.
Thank you, guys. As we have more topics to cover, I'd like to move to the second one. Now, biotech and pharma both produce medicines, one from living organisms, the other from chemical bases. Now, in the world of investing, both are important in this sector, but having very different risk profiles despite the broad similarities. In recent years, biotechnology startup has sprouted with the aim, or most, to use biotechnology processes to create breakthrough drugs. A volatile, fast-growing industry expected to reach 2.4 trillion by 2028. 2.4 trillion is almost 1/10 of US GDP today. My question is, how can healthcare be leveraged to improve biotech and pharma? Simon, if you want to take this one, starting.
Sure, happy to. Well, this is the beauty again with these kind of technological approaches. You can leverage them across basically any component that you're looking at. And again, I guess I'll come at this more from the taking data and computational sciences, applying it to biotech, to pharma. There's a fantastic example that I always bring up, which is a company called DeepMind, bought up by Google a couple of years back, I believe now. They developed something called AlphaFold. Now, to put some perspective into this, one of the fundamental blocks that we use in terms of the kind of interactive level in human biology is the protein. This is basically the executional level. Now, proteins are very interesting in that they're quite long chains, but they fold in on themselves. So they basically form these complex structures. Now, for many years and millions of dollars in research spending, we were able to elucidate about 17% of those proteins in terms of their 3D structure. AlphaFold and DeepMind, they came along and said, okay, let's take the understanding that we have of those 17%, now leverage that across the spectrum, and therefore apply it to what we estimate the other 80-ish% will look like. And we knew that in terms of a linear fashion, we just didn't know the 3D structure of it. They were able in 2 years to crack that nut and basically say, okay, that's it. We've now got 99% of the human protein 3D folding structures elucidated. That, from a kind of biotech, a drug discovery point of view, is enormous in terms of its potential, because suddenly you can see binding pockets. You can see how these kind of proteins are actually folding in on themselves. So any problems in terms of that structure, you can identify it, understand it, and see how you can actually exploit it. These are the types of approaches that we're seeing in the space that are just now kind of, again, coming of age in terms of the modeling. We're seeing others that are developing, again, either cell-cell or intracellular models in silico. So you can run thousands of drug screening compounds immediately on these assays, which are, again, in silico. So you can do them in minutes or hours, have the outputs, therefore drive that entire drug discovery process a lot faster, more effectively, hopefully therefore improving your pathways. We get to clinical trials, there we're now starting to be able to stratify patients, be it with MRI, be it with metabolomic markers, other forms, etc. Even when we're taking, standard blood tests now, we can make inferences from that to be able to say, okay, because this is upregulated, downregulated, etc., the combinations, we can now identify which patient might or might not be best suited for a clinical trial, therefore increasing its probability of success at the end of the day. So again, driving more patients through that, having a higher final, basically, candidate approval rate at the end of the days. And then after that, of course, again, using remote patient monitoring, using these kind of healthcare at home systems that we've been discussing, you're able to track the patients, see how they're changing, seeing how they're evolving. So either use that for kind of phase 4 post-marketing studies, or even for the sales and marketing perspective for pharma, being able to better understand the patient populations, understanding who's actually using the drugs the way they should be and who's not, and therefore being able to intervene. Bruno, I guess you can jump in here as well.
Yeah, it makes me think of another point. I mean, 20 years ago and more, we're talking about bioinformatics, but we didn't have the power of calculation that we have now. And there was a basic principle, which was garbage in, garbage out.
Yep.
So you could run any algorithm, any model. If you didn't have the right input, you were bound to failure. And the conclusions you were led to were actually totally wrong. And so it was a waste of time and money. And I think what has been changing is that it is the kind of machine learning approach to it, thanks again to the power of calculation, whereby you can, as you go through a given path, understand and further validate what is wrong or what is right, and get more of a quality output, which is as well pretty key, because otherwise you'll just get lots more noise and you'll get totally lost in translation at some point. So I think this is as well some big trend in terms of the technological approach, where we can rely more on the output, and then it needs to be readable by the end customer, be it a physician or even be it a patient.
Yeah.
If I can just plug in, it's very interesting what Bruno and Simon have said. It's interesting because they highlighted a very huge issue in today's development, healthcare technology development, and especially in drugs, which is something that a few years ago the Tufts University calculated that the cost of drug development from scratch to the final marketed product, it's about 1.3 billion of dollars, which is equally reported in different phases. So the opportunity to use technologies that can in a way minimize the risk among all the phases of producing a drug, it's incredible. Even by reducing of 3-5 percentage point the risk of failure in each of these phases lead to incredible amount of money saved. And you do that for sure in the preclinical phase. Simon mentioned the in silico analysis of protein folding, but analysis, genetic analysis, molecular analysis, and so on are absolutely still well used. But also in the clinical phase, the use of artificial intelligence and machine learning technologies to cluster patients in a specific class. It's something that we are exploring as is having an incredible impact in finding drugs that are cost effective, because that's the ultimate goal. Because it's a drug is not cost effective, national healthcare system are not going to reimburse it. That's absolutely an issue. We don't have the money anymore to use technologies that are not useful. We used to have, we did a lot. Everyone got rich, everyone was so happy. There was food for everybody, but the buffet time is over.
But Alessandro, even to that, I mean, even if we accept the costs as they are and say, okay, fine, we can deal with the increasing costs, we just don't have the supply of healthcare anymore anyways. I mean, we have an aging population, we have enormously high rates of chronic diseases that are only set to continue. When you look at the time it takes to train a radiologist or even a GP, there isn't a hope that we can basically continue and sustain that level. That's why, for me at least, again, these digital approaches, this kind of health tech that's finally coming of age now, it's pretty much our only alternative. And without it, I think we're basically doomed.
Elena, do you want to add something?
Yeah, thank you again. I mean, from my point of view, whenever we are looking to improve pharma industry or biotech industry, there are two common challenges. One common challenge is whatever we do in the lab as researchers with our heads or with the machines, there are going to be a lot of data generated. And sometimes you need a really skilled mind to make sense out of it. So what I propose as a scientist is that we need to align processes in the way where all data that we are getting from the lab work and is generated in the way that becomes more easily accessible and understandable by software, and to make sense out of it. This is something which is lagging. I mean, like, as we all know, for all science and all discoveries, there are two parts. One part is data generation and data capturing. This is a part about analysis which is about entering information that we attended from experiments or from anything that we are doing into spreadsheet or any other type of software. And then second one, we have to make sense out of it. So this second part of playing with the data is and getting and leveraging information out of it is required a human mind. But if we are able to align these two processes of getting information and data and putting it into the spreadsheet that will be easily accessible by any type of software or artificial intelligence, will make a huge and tremendous groundbreak in the field of discovery.
Thank you, Elena. Pamela, if you want to add something, please.
Yeah, definitely. No, I completely agree. And I would say I work a lot with pharma companies leveraging their real world evidence. How do they optimize their real world evidence collection? And I think the holy grail would be adding the real world evidence to the clinical data, the lab data, and being able to make sense of it that way. Because I think on its own, those individual pockets only tell part of the story, but it would be the power of being able to have that data in a sensible way together, being able to be analyzed. Especially, I think personally, I have a big focus on individual patient populations because I think there's an enormous amount of nuance, even within a very precise disease. So I think there's an element of including biomarkers, et cetera. But I absolutely agree with you, Elena. I think analysis and the insight from that analysis is going to be key to unlocking a lot of impact.
Thank you, guys. Let me move to the third. Now, technology is not only making our car safer or smartphone faster, but also changing the way, for example, medical professionals diagnose and treat chronic disease. Over time, diagnostic tools and technology like machine learning, AI, IoT, robotics are advancing and evolving, helping doctors to diagnose and treat their patients probably faster with more accuracy. So to my question, can really tech make diagnosis faster and more accurate? And if yes, as I believe, how?
Yeah. I mean, obviously, this is my passion, and I believe it's necessary. So yes, it can and it has to. And to Simon's point earlier, we don't have the resources in our healthcare systems to do things the way we've been doing them. So medtech has to make it faster and better because we've also have more people. And I think it's going to be really crucial when we consider also the increased demands from the patients and the consumers. So obviously we have an aging population, we have an increasing burden of chronic conditions, but we also have an increasingly savvy consumer base. And we have the expectations that have been raised through increased digital health engagement over the past 2 years. And so there's going to be really this pull for medtech to deliver too. It's not just an opportunity, it's a dramatic unmet need that consumers are expecting the same healthcare experience as their consumer experience or their online shopping experience, because we're now operating in a more on-demand sphere across the board. So I think there's a need that we have to. And I do think there's been an enormous amount of innovation, but that's why I mentioned before, there's innovation that needs funding, because if we're only funding much more mature medtech businesses, we're missing out on propelling forward the businesses that have these innovations that will really meet demands. So that's where I see it. I don't know what others think.
Simon, do you want to add something?
Again, very biased, so forgive me, I guess, on that sense. Couldn't agree more. I mean, the answer is yes. These novel approaches and technologies, they're basically geared towards this. You're taking enormously complex data sets and being able to, I guess, alternatively to what we used to do, break down, very complex questions into tiny little bite-sized pieces and answer. That was what science was doing for, the past thousands of years, very successfully. Now we've gotten to that stage where we're able to build it up into extremely complex models and understandings. Therefore, suddenly, what was it? 20 years ago, we used to say, okay, you have diabetes type 2. That's it. You are a type 2 diabetic patient. Period. That's it. This is the treatment you will be getting. Then we started to move on and we said, okay, actually now we're starting to see that, depending on the condition, but also on the patient, Pamela's point, you're actually not going to respond quite exactly the same. Therefore, you might want to tweak things. we kind of have milligrams per kilogram as a way of defining how much treatment a patient should be given. Now, as we're continuing kind of on our progression of understanding with genomics, proteomics, metabolomics, all of this, even just kind of the environmental factors that will influence each of us, we get this enormously granular understanding of why will I, for example, versus, a identical twin of mine who's been spending their entire life in Australia, for example, respond slightly differently to the same treatment, whereas in theory we shouldn't. But again, because of microbiome changes or whatever other exposures we've had, etc., or just whichever genes are upregulated, downregulated at a certain moment in time, it'll change things. So the way we're going to kind of see this go forward in the future is more and more of these technologies will be applied. Before we even start thinking about what treatment should we use, it'll be, okay, let's first understand the patient. We've developed for years these fantastic products, and we need to continue doing so in terms of actual pharma and drug development. But at the same time, it's extremely valuable to know today, if I'm going to be prescribing this $80,000 treatment, I, for example, a payer, want to have a 90% certainty that the patient's actually going to respond, not the 1 in 3 chance that I have in most cases today. So for me, one, it's about improving quality of care, and these approaches can do so. But secondly, it's also making sure that actually we're not necessarily spending less, but we're making sure that we're getting the right bang for the buck in terms of the healthcare expenditure, and therefore that actual patient outcome. And that's truly where I kind of see these technologies coming in and really being able to bridge that gap. So it's everything from drug discovery through to understanding the patient, diagnosing earlier, and then also making sure you're on the right treatment and at the right time. I think that's a critical piece as well.
If I may, Max, because I think in relation to what we're discussing, there is a question in the chat that we may want to.
Absolutely.
But as a former geneticist, I just wanna say, it took us like 20 years and several hundred millions of dollars to sequence the first human genome, right? You remember
1.6 billion? Yeah.
Got you. You remember Bill Clinton and Francis Collins announcing the first human genome being sequenced. Okay. Nowadays, you can. There was a recent news that Stanford sequenced the full genome in about 9 hours, giving the diagnosis to the patients in 9 hours. From really, this is like from bench to the bedside. That's really the idea. And when I was in the regulatory agency of my country, we actually approved the drug that was, I won't make any name, but this drug was perfectly cost effective in certain patients and totally not cost effective in other patients. So the other side of the coin is, what if some molecular data allow us to discriminate patients for which the certain technology, drug or whatever, are effective and some of them not? Are we discriminating? And that's, honestly, guys, it's a huge issue. It's a huge issue when you have to decide, when you need to tell, in the community setting, so in a real world situation, you need to tell, no, sorry, you cannot take this drug because this drug is very expensive, and that won't help you. Convincing a sick person of this, especially people who are very sick, kids, imagine kids with genetic disease, it's something absolutely paramount, completely crazy. Even though, there's a rationale behind it, there's a scientific rationale, but unfortunately, that's the other side of the coin to me. Sorry.
No, you're completely right. But I mean, if we take that example and kind of push it forward, I mean, oncology, I guess, is one of the better examples where we have, genetic markers. We're starting to have others, KRAS, EGFR, etc. The option is, again, maybe I simplified a bit too much. It's either we'll be giving you something which is not only expensive, but let's take the cost out of that. But it's not going to do anything. So in other words, your tumor is going to keep growing, but we can give this to you. Or we can say, okay, actually, there's multiple other options we can try. We don't know if they won't do anything, but we at least don't have a marker that's telling us it's not going to be effective. So in terms of it, I guess you do discriminate based on the genetics. At the same time, if the response is actually it's not going to work, then you're not doing anyone any favors. In fact, you're doing a disservice to the patient, to the payers, to the entire system, rather than saying we should find the alternative that might have a shot of working here. That seems to be the rationale, I guess.
Thank you. We take the Q&A in the end, although maybe the one from less Sydney we can take later because we're going to talk about digital healthcare and remote healthcare shortly. Elena?
No, I just wanted to add to this beautiful discussion about necessity of moving towards personalized cell therapies and gene therapies, because the point is that we can see that there are thousands of papers are coming about microbiome and showing that every one of us is different. So why, in case we have all this data, that even like two siblings, they have completely different, to have completely different microbiome, why we want to treat them with a similar type of drug and to expect that they will be all, both react similarly. And like this, for me, it's a shame. And I think that as someone like Simon already mentioned, the idea is to move towards more personalized cell therapies, and at least to prescribe the drugs based on, of course, it will be a bit of bias, but at least based on some genetic similarity or microbiome similarity. It is should be done.
Thank you, Elena. I would like to move to the next. With the help of digital health tools, virtual care, and we move to the virtual care now, can fundamentally change healthcare access and deliver an improved care experience. Digitization in life science sector has led to an increase in new point of care systems, digital pharmacy setups, and easy and efficient access to healthcare. Easy regulation during the pandemic increased adoption of telemedicine in many countries. The home is hub today, is hub of connectivity and emerging as a clinical point of care. So to the question, which technology will enhance the capability and effectiveness of remote care?
I just have one comment. I'm not necessarily the best specialist into this area, but I think first and foremost, when you look at the big picture, it's about compatibility of systems, okay? And being able to exchange data and have the same standards. And to one question in the chat, which was about how to introduce digital health into current and standard care, so beyond R&D. One of the many concerns that I experienced actually in my country and elsewhere is the fact that, for example, IT providers are selling solutions which are not compatible, and they're creating silos. And each clinic and hospital has to make sure that between their units, there is this kind of compatibility that very often doesn't exist. And it's even worse for the patient at the end of the chain, because we as patients don't have necessarily all the data available in a format that will be able to be shared when we move from one docs to the other, from one center of care to the other, from one country to the other. So I think that this compatibility issue, which in part is industry driven, but not for the good reasons, needs to be tackled at some point.
Alessandro.
It's very interesting. So my question is, given all the infrastructure and now we do have in terms of bandwidth, in terms of access to computers, to mobile technology, and so on. So who's going to be the end user? Because if we analyze in a very systematic way, the end user of this technology are going to be probably people in their 70s or older, with oftentimes reduced capability to use these technologies on one side. And on the other side, there are physicians. They are not really well known as early adopters of new technology, to be honest. And I'm being, try to be very positive in that perspective. So there's this asymmetry which could be an extreme issue, and we tangibly witnesses this issue of providing new technology, great technology for monitoring, to check their health, measuring remotely blood pressure, checking with the physician with the cameras and so on. But honestly, the level of ability to access the technology has always been very complex. So when the new startups come to me and I do diligence them in terms of what could possibly their impact, the analysis of who's going to use that is still a big issue. We're still in a world ruled by baby boomers. These are the people who still got the money. It's not us. And people who are actually making the decision also at policy level. So I know that this sounds kind of creepy, but at least in Italy, and not only in Italy, in Europe, this is a big issue. May not be an issue, for example, in Africa, where the let's say the average age is much lower. But in Europe, this is still an issue and probably the biggest barrier to the adoption of this technology. And consider that people, especially elderly, want to still have a physical contact, and especially European, will still want to have direct contact with their physician.
Thank you, Alessandro. Simon, you want to add something?
Yeah, maybe just going back to the actual question. I mean, which technologies? I think the reality is which technology won't impact or be able to collect, patient data or insights or generate at least insights. I mean, the reality is we're seeing today, the smartphone, it's being used in all kinds of ways. We have the Apple Watch, we have other types of new technologies, be it, even as simple as, for example, having a video call now. You're actually seeing applications, technologies that are able to diagnose, give actual fundamental diagnostic insights just from the facial recognition component of that. Muscle movements, eye contact, you're able to differentiate heart rates, you're able to see stress levels, all these types of things. So I think at a certain stage, we must also accept that basically anything we can see could potentially be leveraged to bring insights into a patient's state of health. It's more of the, what are you using it for and how do you intend to use it there afterwards? Driving towards what's the ultimate impact you're trying to achieve again. I mean, if it's trying to monitor patients, if they're chronic, if they're, I don't know, let's say if elderly sort, then you can basically take these technologies and say, actually, there's an opportunity here. We just need to make sure that we're doing it in such a way that makes it extremely passive. They barely even realize that it's there. And to be honest, we're even starting to see now in CBT approaches, so all of these kind of psychotherapy type approaches, etc. Just by using this phone, by tracking how much I move, how much I walk, by the speed or the stress level in my text typing, you're able to infer an enormous amount about a patient's psychological status. So, it's all of these kind of pieces. And Bruno, you said something really interesting, and I wholeheartedly agree. It's this lack of certain standardizations. We basically have, apples and oranges and pears and bananas all kind of coming together. Now, we do need to get better at that. But at the same time, what I've seen in a couple of cases is startups looking at that and saying, okay, I can treat this either as a major pain in my backside, or I can see this as an extraordinary opportunity to create a means of basically grabbing the market and having a protection mechanism that no one else can get into very easily without redesigning or redeveloping something. So, approaches like natural languaging processing, etc., are able to take documents that are normally completely unstandardized, like business cards. They're not all exactly the same, and suddenly take them and make it apples to apples, and therefore extract data and therefore generate enormous amounts of insights into otherwise data that was just lost or set aside, etc. So enormous opportunities, I guess, as well is just one of the things I wanted to point out there.
Yeah, and I'd love to build on that, Simon, because I think we all agree there's an enormous amount that we could do. There's a huge opportunity, and in a way we're limited by what we're allowed to do with the data and how data is governed more broadly. And then also in terms of what's a feasible business and what's going to be a proper business model that's going to sustain itself. If it's going to take 5 years to get to that point, well, the business might fold before then. So there's kind of other intervening factors in our ability to have these technologies make an impact. But it was a very big question, Max. I like that question. There certainly will be a big impact, but I think there's a lot of business nous that's going to drive which businesses succeed, because it's not just about the science in that play. It's about navigating a much more complicated and dynamic landscape.
Thank you, Pamela. Elena, if you want to add something.
No, I totally agree with all the speakers. But one of the biggest issues that we started to forget that not all the countries and not all populations of the people are the same. some population of people that don't have even access to the electricity, and they have like electricity for in Africa for 2 hours per day. So what shall we do with this group of people? I mean, like you can do amazing like app on the Apple that will recognize that you have a cancer by just looking at you. But at the same time, it will be only accessible to the group of people, but the rest of group of people it. So the idea is also about not forgetting about all the people needs, and also taking into account these people. And I mean, like it's extremely good to progress. And I do believe, and I do agree with Pamela that markets will dictate, I mean, like to which direction progress should be going.
I completely agree with you. That's maybe where I see it slightly differently, because again, when you look at kind of the amount of smartphones deployed in, let's say, sub-Saharan Africa, for example, versus access to other types of standardized healthcare, so lab tests, etc., you have an enormous skew saying, okay, actually, if we can leverage the smartphone and these types of technologies, which have been more consumer adopted, you can basically, to a certain degree, and I hate saying this, but democratize healthcare in a certain way. It's more providing a level of care, at least, that was not at all possible before, when you were based on bricks and mortar infrastructure that we have, for example, here in Europe, in spades of it, still limited because we still don't have enough of a supply of it. But in comparison, enormous in terms of population quantity there. So it's how can we use these things? How can we leverage them? How can we therefore deploy healthcare much more efficiently and effectively?
No, I totally agree with you, and I totally think that we should always go with the progress. But at the same time, it will be at the same time a bit racist that we will care only about one group of people, and at the same time we'll be forgetting about other group of people. So it's all about, I mean, like as you told, of being a bit democratic, but at the same time trying to adapt this technology that it will be accessible, not with, I don't know, with the last iPhone, but it will be accessible with like 5 models below, or it's just gambling a bit. But at the same time, we should do it more easily accessible to everyone.
I will take 1 minute because let's listen to questions pretty much related to this one. Do we believe the digital health and telemedicine is being held up by having no agreed standard in electronic patients records?
I mean, we do have certain standards. We have things like fear coming in. And again, I'm not an expert in this in any way, shape, or form, but there are certain levels of standards in terms of electronic medical records, electronic health records, even lab information management systems. It's extraordinarily complex because each country has either its own systems, and even each hospital chain sometimes has its own. And to be perfectly frank, even between labs, sometimes they run different systems because of it. It is slowing things down to a certain degree, because again, it's apples and oranges versus apples and apples. But again, it could present some enormous opportunities if you decide that's where you want to focus some of your efforts. Being able to basically build something that translates apples and oranges into the same common language, you certainly have an enormous advantage versus others who are still kind of scratching their heads and saying, well, actually, we can only take 5% of the market because we only speak that type of EHR language versus another.
Thank you, Simon.
If I can just add something about it. So I agree with Simon about the fact that the electronic health records have standards both in US and Europe and in Asia as well. What I think it's still a deeply unregulated sector is the digital therapeutics, which is something nobody really, not nobody, but it's something really still in the clouds that it's actually eating our market in the past 2 years, and it's something extremely interesting. Probably will bloom in the next year, but it will be hard for the regulatory agency and for the national healthcare systems to control and to regulate. And this is I know Germany is very advanced in that. Italy is, as usual, at the end of the train, but I'm not really. We're not so bad as usual. But I'm there's still something. I know FDA is regulating them, but this is something extremely hard as find a framework to regulate this. But it is an extremely interesting area. The main issue is the fact that until 20, 30 years ago, drugs were synthetic drugs. So very easy to determine. You got a chemical structure. They pretty much know what they were doing. But now drugs, it's a much wider word. that encompasses use of software, the genetic and molecular analysis, and so on. So you need the multidisciplinary competence to assess this, not only from a technical perspective, also in terms of impact, economic impact. So the situation nowadays is much more complex, and we need different technicians to assess the complexities of and to drive the complexities of these conditions.
Thank you, Alessandro. I'd like to move to the next one, which is probably my favorite one. Corporate VC funding for digital health reached a record high in 2020-2021 during the pandemic all over the world. Health funding among US-based startups soared to a record of 29, almost 30 billion, 729 deals in 2021, nearly doubling the prior year, 2020. Venture investment in healthcare nearly doubled in Europe as well, rising from 8 billion to almost 14 billion. According to Silicon Valley Bank, European venture invested the most in healthcare, medical devices, with a combined 150% increase in funding. Biopharma also had a boost in venture investment for almost 5 million to 7 million, roughly. So my question is, if you were to do an health tech startup today, which area would you choose to focus?
I have an idea. Can I go first, Max? I think I would definitely be a femtech, medtech startup, because in addition to what you just shared in terms of the growth figures, there's also the enormous gender healthcare gap that's been exposed. And there's a real focus on women as a very important and growing consumer group. So I know that this is much less technical, perhaps, than what we've been discussing so far, but your question was broad, Max. So I think that that would definitely be somewhere where I would put my money.
I mean, because we have founders watching today, what we can do is giving them some tip, some advice, maybe new way to go with the ideas. Simon, what do you think?
I mean, as I said, it's kind of depending on what your objective is here. What I would try and look for is an area where you have this bottleneck. And, you know, I love kind of looking at bottlenecks because you understand that it's kind of a gatekeeper of sorts. So again, we were discussing this idea about electronic health records and being able to access that and leverage that. You say, okay, my objective is, for example, to take all this data and be able to use it. But unfortunately, today that data is not in a form that's structured or standardized, or, you know, as Bruno was saying, it's garbage, but I can transform it. I would look for startups or scale-ups that are working in those kind of spaces to say, we can change that bottleneck from being these kind of closed gates to actually completely open floodgates, launching information out there and being able to be leveraged across the spectrum. So for me, what that means is anywhere where you can suddenly kind of plug into and extract other knowledge or data sets that are otherwise not existing today, or leveraging them in new fashions that you couldn't do previously. And probably ones that aren't necessarily as big as you would normally imagine. So, you know, oncology, for example, that it's a very huge market, but there's an enormous level of competition. I would maybe look at kind of going into something else like inflammation, immunology, something like that, and saying similar approaches as in oncology, but I'll apply them to a new area. Or going all the way extreme, let's say, to the next kind of area, which would be multi-omics. So combining different data types and building, again, this notion of the bigger understanding to therefore be able to leverage it. So I'm going to give you a complete non-answer there, Max. I'd basically invest wherever it's really interesting.
Bruno, what do you think? Would you like to say something?
Yeah, well, just to reflect on what Simon was mentioning, I think that central nervous system, and especially psychiatric disorders, is probably the next thing to happen. I mean, so far, and for a decade, it has been defined based on clinical symptomatology. And honestly, it's a lot of specialists and patients will tell you it's rubbish, because there is a confusion between disorders. Those disorders evolve, they are poorly diagnosed. I mean, it needs to get into biology, mechanism of action, to have much more relevance. And this is where I see the next revolution coming. And this is where probably Simon was coming from when saying that it's going to be like oncology is today and the evolution it went through in the last 20 years. I can see a few startups getting there. I think it will still take some time. And here, I mean, as much as in our discussion before, it's not tech only that will change things. We need all the stakeholders to join forces. And it's about regulators, it's about politicians, it's about whoever has some impact, and we need to communicate between each other. Patient association, big thing to act upon to drive that into full effect. Then coming back to the question, I mean, I'm not a health tech specialist per se, but I would tend to I mean, I'm not a specialist, but I'm following it, obviously. I'm looking at a few opportunities. I never found yet business models that are, I would say, enticing enough for me as a more classic VC investors to invest in. And I would say that if I was to consider some investment, I would go probably more into the B2B type of model, because it probably costs less to get some adoption. And I will try to find business models that can fail quickly so that we can think about how to improve this. And this would be in total opposition to my daily life, which is investing into classic biotech and medtech, where usually it takes a few years and painful investment before we realize if your investment thesis was right or wrong. But this is my 2 pence comments I would put into this question. We've got more specialists in the panel.
Thank you, Bruno.
I just want to. I agree with Simon. I myself love bottlenecks. Now I would love a bottleneck of red wine, by the way. So this is something I really enjoy right now. But we spent the last 150 years in focusing on a vertical aspect of medicine, on healthcare. Okay, so day by day we were going more in details. At the organ level, and then at the cellular level, and then a molecular level on the issues. And we probably lost sometimes, I think, the idea of a broader picture of the complexity of disease, especially for what concerns the chronic disease. And this is clearly something we're going through. So every disease has an intrinsic complexity that needs to be assessed at different level, including the social level. If you think about the study that they reported how much, for example, the social network is impacting on the health of elderly people. So people within a social network, like a physical social network, not within Facebook, are really get sick much less than people that are much less, yes, than people that are isolated. That that's a huge issue. And there's another which I would like to point out. We always talk about precision medicine, but we never talk about precision health, which is a predictive and preemptive approach to disease, actually to health rather than to disease. So how can I take care of myself in a very cost-effective way in order not to get sick? And this is starting like at day 0 when we were born. Actually, epigenetics told us that even before our birth, this is extremely important, like the health of our parents. So we should look again, we should rewind everything and look again at the way we are applying our discoveries.
Thank you, Alessandro. Elena, if you want to add something.
Yeah, I have just precise idea about it. So I will focus more on technology in pharma or R&D labs, which takes hours for us to perform experiments or to achieve the data. But with the help of artificial intelligence, it can be done in less than the minutes. And I can give you an example. Like we both know an instrument or machine, which is called mass spectrometry. So this machine can make a protein analysis and blueprint of its protein in a matter of seconds. But sometimes when we are using it like old school, it takes us up to 72 hours to make things done. So, and not everyone, I mean, like people or scientists can understand or interpret the data. So using artificial intelligence or in technology or even software that will be accessible by every person who don't know how to interpret it and can use this any experiment or machine, I think it will be, and that willing to get desirable data out of it, it will be crucial.
Thank you, Elena. We had the last topic actually, sorry, and after we take some Q&A, we don't have so much time, another 10-20 minutes. So let me go to the last one. Artificial intelligence aims to mimic human cognitive functions. This brings a paradigm shift into healthcare, powered by increasing availability of healthcare data and a rapid progress of analytics techniques. Popular AI techniques include machine learning methods for structured data, as well as natural language processing for unstructured data. Major disease areas that use AI tools include cancer, neurology, cardiology, with application in three major areas of early detection and diagnosis, treatment, as well as outcome prediction and prognosis evaluation. To my question, this is the last one. How to make sure the extensive promotion of AI in healthcare results in concrete and useful applications? Who would like to start? Simon?
I would be provocative, ask the VCs not to invest into solutions that don't have that as an outcome, as a goal. It will be less money spent and more money wisely spent on the right approaches.
Yeah, I mean, what can I say? I guess the best way of doing this is going to be to demonstrate that there is utility and impact. I mean, to Bruno's point, you put money into it, you hope that, well, the objective is that it's going to do something more effectively, more efficiently, or at least at a lower cost point, and therefore generate revenue somewhere. For me, it's look at, in the past cases, where have we used AI, ML, DL, all of these types of approaches, whichever you choose, really, and see what has been the objective and the outcome at the end of the day. So we've seen some interesting cases where, one, it's absolutely done nothing. In certain cases where it's done absolutely fantastically, and it's actually been able to change the way that we kind of focus in on these treatment paradigms. But the reality is, you need to make sure that there's an unmet medical need that you're actually applying this to. And therefore, if you take something, there needs to be a need before you actually try and develop a solution. I think that's where an enormous amount of actually the companies I've seen lately that have failed quite spectacularly, they haven't really quite discerned what the need is that they're going after. By not really understanding it, or at least quantifying, qualifying it, whatever we want to call it, they kind of they develop along, they get this great technology approach, they're very happy with it, it's amazing from an actual technological perspective. But then when you actually say, but what does it do and what problem is it solving, it becomes very unclear. So for me, it's kind of almost bring this back to, even looking at it from a biotech or a classical medtech investment approach, it's, okay, what's the fundamental unmet medical need and how is this going to solve it? And therefore, what would be the best approach to solving that? That's, to me at least, the way that we can look at this from a very kind of squared investor perspective, and also say, okay, well, this has a chance of actually, one, having an impact on healthcare and outcomes, and two, therefore generating a return for an investor.
And it's true that we see, I will just add two things. It's true that we see still too often a disconnect between what is proposed to us and the great technology approach and science and great minds and intelligence and the commercial approach, i.e., where is the market, the addressable market? Where are the patients? So who is going to prescribe it? Who is going to pay for it? And market access needs to be done as early as possible, even though nothing has to be set in stone, but you need to do that exercise and revisit it regularly, because guess what? Very dynamic world, things evolve regulatory-wise, competition-wise, patient usage-wise as well. And actually in the medtech world, it's terrible to see a device which has been poorly designed originally, because years after, it's too late to change it. And it could be things as simple as having the right sensors to take the data and analyze it. Sometimes it's not even thought of in our age, which is obviously mind-boggling, I think we say in English. Second quick point is that I'd like to thank people in the chat, because they are bringing as well some interesting perspective and views from their own experience. And one which I liked, I lost track of that, which is, and it's in relationship to what we're being discussing now. It's the fact that not enough of those innovations are being co-designed and co-developed with the users. And this is a pity. This is a pity. So, I mean, you have great intelligence, but you need complementary intelligence. And again, a connection with the users and the payers again and again. I cannot stress enough of that.
Thank you, Bruno. Pamela.
I completely agree with Bruno. I have nothing more to add. Those last 3 points that you made, Bruno, I couldn't agree more.
Thank you, Pamela. Alessandro, do you want to add something?
No, I totally agree with that. It's clearly the issue is how new technologies, including artificial intelligence, is streamlined, and it's connected to the existing procedures and activity that are already ongoing. I think that one of the key issues and one of the aspects that could determine the success of the introduction of these technologies is how much they are compatible with what already exists in the real world practice.
Elena, if you want also to add.
I mean, I don't have anything else to add. It was said very well by Bruno and by Simon, so I don't have anything more.
Maybe Max, if you don't mind, I'll just make one little comment, and I guess this is more from a perspective of investing into life sciences, and now we're specifically talking about health tech. I just wanted to highlight one point. Biotech and medtech, very classically, and this is kind of, Bruno, I think you raised this one. They didn't necessarily need to worry too much about commercialization, because in most cases, the exits would happen based on clinical evidence at kind of a phase 2 or something like that. Pharma would therefore incorporate it, finalize off, and insert it into their sales and marketing channels. MedTech, somewhat similar. You'd be partnering up with the bigger guys. They'd probably be using their sales and distribution channels in most cases, fitted into their product portfolios. Now that we're talking about health tech, this is a little bit of a different beast, in fact, in that most cases you'll actually get to commercialization very quickly, and that'll be part of what you need to build up to build towards an exit. So you're actually looking to exit eventually on things like revenues, things like EBITDA, etc. And this is just something, a little bit of a highlight of a different mindset, which is also why digital health and health tech, I think, is very much this confluence between tech investors on the one side, or techs on the one side, and much more the life science expertise on the other, and more of that coming together of both mindsets, because you have this fundamental life science understanding, but also this need to understand commercialization, commercial pathways, etc., which is a bit more different there. Just a quick point to highlight, at least.
Absolutely, thank you. Rob Halkes, I hope I can pronounce well. My microphone is on. He has an answer as well. My answer to Team 5, research support the development of a patient application to medication adherence, specific to specific disease and personalized to the characteristic and symptoms of the patient. I do think it's possible to realize with AI-based bot development, and you need a multidisciplinary team in development. Now, there is one, we can have a couple of questions, some Q&A from the audience as well. Barak Heavy, sorry. What do you find to be the barriers for digital health solutions into the traditional health system, insurance profiles, etc.? Who wants to take it?
I will just make one answer among many others to that question, because I've discussed that with insurers. It's about the prevention aspects, as much as the costly therapeutic treatment modalities we have in cell and gene therapies. So about prevention, if we have an insurer that has to take on board the cost for one of his customers for all preventative measures to avoid him being sick, obviously there is an alignment of interest, one would think originally, because it will hopefully avoid the later much higher cost if this person insured becomes sick. So better to invest to keep him or her healthy as long as possible and not have to go into costly treatment afterwards, be it for procedures in hospitals and clinics or chronic conditions to take care of. Having said that, the issue is that people move from one insurer to the other. And this is where there is a misalignment between what would be ideal for an individual and the economic outcome for those insurers. So this is something that I've been discussing with many insurers. No one really has a solution right now. Or at least if there's a solution, it didn't come across my mind nor my discussions. First point. Second point is about those expensive gene and cell therapy treatments, because it's all about who pays the bill. And again, the one insurer paying the bill originally might not benefit of it if the person being cured moves somewhere else. Okay, great. I covered $1 million expense for that gene therapy for a patient. And now guess what? He's moving out. He's paying his monthly fees to some other insurers. And I'm totally negative on that customer. Doesn't work out for me. And so this is where today there's a lot of payment schedules and ideas, which are in part related to the durability of action as well, and where an insurer will not necessarily pay for the full cost at T0. But this is something that needs to be carefully thought of so that it doesn't create a barrier to new solutions actually being digital health related or more classic biotech and medtech. That's all I have to say as an answer.
Thank you, Bruno. I will take another two questions, and after we close. Les Lindsay. I think the points raised by Pamela Walker and Simon Turner are personalized medicine, where the treatment varies away from one size fits all, will be determined by having the ability to analyze the individual's biomarkers. These biomarkers also show much more rapidly than X-rays. For example, if a drug therapy is working sometimes within days or hours for ITU patients, what are the most exciting areas of research into using these biomarkers? Is there a center of excellence for utilizing biomarkers in this manner? Simon and Pamela.
Yeah, no, that's such an interesting question. I'm a massive fan of biomarkers. What I find really interesting is that across different countries, there's different perspectives in terms of how HCPs value the use of biomarkers in the diagnosis and also the monitoring of patients. But what I'm seeing more and more often is the linking of biomarkers to more specific treatments, and then to be able to evaluate how patients get on with those treatments. So I think this is a really important area.
Again, yeah, what can I say? I'm a huge fan of this topic. I guess maybe just taking a step back a little bit and maybe more qualifying what do we mean by biomarkers, because this can mean basically anything. I think when I'm reading in this chat, it sounds more like it's radiomics, so really looking at radiology markers. Hugely interesting. Its development is absolutely fantastic when we're starting to look at things like, the use of MRI in, well, Bruno, you mentioned aducanumab, I think previously, in neurology, hugely important in terms of staging, identifying treatment changes, or even, modification of diseases in Alzheimer's, in Parkinson's, and MS, etc. But we can apply it basically everywhere, including in oncology. For me, in terms of centers, I guess, to get to that question, it really depends on what type of biomarkers you're talking about. Because, if you're looking at genomics, genetics, I'd say the UK has enormous initiatives, but we do here in France as well. you have radiomics popping up all over the place, and again, depending on which kind of specifics you can look into. And then I'd say, things like the metabolomics markers. These are new ones that are starting to come of age, and again, really interesting when you're starting to look at things like, can we identify cancer at stage 1 instead of stage 3, 4, which we're doing today in most cases. You identify at stage 1, you actually find it. You can actually go in with a surgical procedure or radiotherapy, for example, cure the patient instead of waiting to get to stage 3, 4, where you're sitting there, you're facing enormous costs. You're going to be using, PDL1 type or EGFR positive patient type drugs, etc. So I guess the answer is there's not one specific center of excellence, more just look broadly and the type of approach that you are wanting to go, because there's an enormous amount of research going on here.
Thank you, Simon. This is the last one we can close by, blockchain. So let me take this one. Clayton from Connect to Care. Now, preventive medicine, AI needs data to be effective, but increasing the privacy law and GDPR creates an environment where patients and are encouraged to share less and less personal data. How much are you seeing blockchain and self-sovereign identity come into the med and healthcare sphere, and how geared up is the health industry to embrace the benefits that blockchain and SSI offer from a data privacy, preserving and sharing perspective?
It's there, I guess, in certain cases, we are seeing it in investments, and particularly kind of individual companies using blockchain to try and really kind of insert this into patient data and patient records. I think the reality is we're underestimating our ability to also create anonymized patient data, or at least anonymize it for a period of time for the analysis and then de-anonymize it back again when you're getting to basically where the patient is or the care practitioner is. So I would say it is an issue to a certain degree. There are clever ways around it, though, which, again, make sure that they adhere to the data privacy laws and regulations that are there, but at the same time also find ways of doing it to an extent where you can still use the data in a useful setting and not just be constrained by it.
Alessandro, you want to add something?
Yeah, as usual, I'm always very disruptive. I don't believe in using blockchain in healthcare, honestly. I haven't seen a single real-world application. I'm talking about real-world application in which an hospital is buying a blockchain application, at least for the situation that I've known. It was very promising. It was a great hype work, just like many others. I haven't seen really any meat in there so far. I may be wrong.
Thank you. First of all, thank you, guys. It's been exciting and beautiful having you today. And thank you also to all the attendees. And hope to see you again. We have the 31st, we have the pitch day in healthcare and life science as well. And we are hosting startups coming from all over the world. And next month, we have a new webinar. At this time will be in impact. Thank you again to everyone, and hope I wish you a very good evening. Take care.